in many ways, what we've been seeing is the extended reaction to the interracial coalition that elected the first Black president in 2008. And what we've seen and heard are the reverberations of reaction. And again, we saw a mob of white supremacists storm a different Capitol with the intention of reversing the outcome of a different election in which a multiracial slate of voters, a multiracial coalition of voters, expressed their will and elected the candidate of their choice. This brings us to more fundamental questions about race and enfranchisement, the ballot, democracy. When we go back to the beginning, we see that African-American participation, political participation, has as its cornerstone the passage and ratification of the 15th Amendment in 1870. And that is crucial because that is the amendment that says that you cannot, it is within the bounds of the Constitution, it is unconstitutional to restrict the right to vote based upon race. And so if we look, this happens right after the Civil War, has this effect of enfranchising millions of Black people. There is a political consideration. Prior to 1860, prior to Abraham Lincoln being elected as president, there was a disproportionate influence of white Southerners in American politics. Many of us remember the 3/5 clause of the Constitution, which allowed for the counting of 60% of the enslaved people in the South. Before the Civil War, there were about 9 million people in the South, the 11 states of the Confederacy. Of those 9 million people, 4 million of them were Black. And so the 5 million white people in the South had the strength of 7.5 million people. They counted 60%, 3/5 of that Black population. And with that exaggerated political influence, they were able to dominate national politics to such an extent that they tore the Union apart. And so before he was assassinated, Abraham Lincoln began pondering the questions of what Reconstruction could look like. And one of the things that he recognized was that there had to be enfranchisement of Black people in some way. He calculated, among other things, we've talked about Abraham Lincoln as a leader, as a person who grappled with the moral complications of slavery, but he was also a politician. And he made the political calculation that if you enfranchised the Black populace of the South, they would be more likely to vote for Republicans than they would for the Democratic Party, which was overwhelmingly dominated by the interests of white slaveholders at that time. And he was right. It took 5 years after his assassination, but the Republican Party pushed through the 15th Amendment and oversaw the ratification of the amendment and enfranchised the Black population, which overnight created an entire body of Black Republicans, I should say Black male Republicans. It would take another 50 years for women to get the right to vote, partly because of the calculation that if women were enfranchised in 1870, that would increase the number of Democrats by larger numbers than it would increase the numbers of Republicans. And so the decision to give Black people the right to vote was done to create a bulwark in defense of democracy against a white supremacist movement that had nearly torn the country in half.